program requirements related to HUD Section 3, Section 3 of the HUD Act of 1968. I'd like to introduce Robert Jameson. He's with our HUD office in San Francisco, and he will be our presenter today. Robert, if you'd like to share a little bit about yourself, that would be great. But I'll hand it off to you. Mahalo.
Great, thank you, Claudine. Hi, everyone. My name is Robert Jameson. I'm a program analyst and the Section 3 coordinator here in the San Francisco office for HUD Region 9, Office of Field Policy and Management. We'd like to first thank my counterpart, Ramona Malehi, in Honolulu for helping set this training up, and Claudine to you as well for both inviting me here today and also taking the time to speak with me and our Section 3 team in headquarters yesterday to kind of get a better understanding of this grant and how it kind of applies to Section 3. So want to spend time today kind of first going over some of the basics of Section 3, just so everyone kind of knows the definitions, the applicability, what it means for your funding, and then get very kind of into the requirements for the Native Hawaiian Housing Block Grant in particular, because sometimes depending on the grant type here at HUD, requirements will vary a bit, and I know this is a new grant, so there might be changes in the future, but for kind of what we say today, this should apply for at least going through the next fiscal year. So I guess with that, we'll get started. So for the first section, again, we'll kind of just go over Section 3, its intent, and the kind of the regulations that we'll be referring to. So the basics of Section 3 are to ensure really that any employment or economic opportunities, so think jobs, that are generated by HUD funding, so mainly grants, will be directed to the greatest extent feasible to the very low income, or those assisted by HUD programs in our community. So these are typically, individuals with housing choice vouchers, place-based vouchers, or just who meet the low median income for the neighborhood, which we'll get into later, of where the project is taking place. So basically just trying to keep our funds local and employing local individuals is the main goal of Section 3. So kind of one thing to distinguish between Section 3 and other HUD programs, it's that it's a preference, basically a hiring preference and not an entitlement program, like voucher programs. So, Section 3 workers and business concerns still have to demonstrate that they have the ability or capacity to perform the job and also successfully complete the contract or employment that they are seeking. So it's not just, anyone who meets the income requirements is therefore eligible. They still have to be able to do the work. So in terms of the regulation, we'll be able to see this in some of the forms that have already, I think, been shared with many of you all regarding the NHHBG. What we were going to refer to is CFR Part 75. So this is in the Federal Register, and it goes over the different regulations and requirements we have at HUD for Section 3 and for funding that triggers Section 3. So there's going to be 4 subparts. Subpart A, which we'll go over today, which is kind of like, general provisions and definitions. And then subpart B and C will be slightly different depending on the funding source, which is actually a pretty interesting topic to cover today, because while technically the Native Hawaiian housing block grant is kind of under ONAP and therefore PIH or public housing, because it is a block grant, we're actually going to be kind of referring to subpart C and the housing and community development provisions. So just kind of one thing to note, that if you really want to go into the weeds and read all about it in the Federal Register, I wouldn't exactly call it beach reading for all of you there if it's still beach weather, but maybe something that if you are a little confused can get more into. So with that, we'll get into the different definitions and applicability. So, like I said, what we first want to look at is the main funding source. So let's focus first here on the housing and community development side. So the difference here is that it's going to be project based. So when we think of, is this thing we're working on Section 3 applicable? Yes, first we have to figure out whether or not the grant itself is applicable to Section 3, which this block grant is. But then we have to see, okay, are we meeting the thresholds for this specific project? So again, project-based, we'll kind of get into why we don't see the NHHBG grant here. It's because I had not really heard of it before too long ago, but that's okay. And we've learned a lot in the past couple weeks, thanks to Ramona and Claudine. So now that we've determined that this grant is Section 3 applicable, we have to then determine whether or not it is a Section 3 project. So what is the specific thing we're working on? So this is typically defined as one of a number of things. So a housing rehabilitation, housing construction, or generally any other public construction projects. Again, looking back to that intent of Section 3, which is it generating employment? So some of the things that really wouldn't be covered in this, which I know can be used for this grant, are rental assistance, acquisition of materials, things like that, like just strictly using the money to buy things to then use to build, like that portion that would not be considered a Section 3 project. Again, it's like, are we generating jobs from this project? So these are the kind of like the broad strokes that we typically see here at HUD: housing rehab, housing construction, other public infrastructure projects. Again, it's assisted under a HUD program. This block grant is the HUD program we're seeking. And then the next item, which is kind of a key difference between the HCD funding, which we're considering this, and the PIH funding, is that there is a minimum dollar amount threshold per project of $200,000. Again, so out of this slide, so what about the block grant we're referring to today? So if we haven't already shared it with you, we should. So for HUD 590 per I, as you can see here, it will state that pursuant to the Section 3 regulations in 24 CFR Part 75, going back to the Federal Register, the NHHBG program is subject to provisions that cover housing rehab, housing construction, and other public construction projects. This is, again, kind of a repeat from the last slide. When the total amount of HUD assistance of the project exceeds the threshold of $200K and is defined as a Section 3 project. So again, this is really just that confirmation based on the HUD 590 form that for this block grant, we are considering it a HCD project, and therefore it will be following HCD definitions, which we're going to get into in these next slides. Okay, so now that we have determined that, yes, this block grant is covered by Section 3, and for example, we're working on a housing construction project where we've used over $200K, we've determined that we do have a Section 3 applicable project. Now what? This is kind of going back into the intent of Section 3 is, who are we trying to prioritize contracting with, and who are we trying to prioritize giving employment to? So these are going to be Section 3 workers and Section 3 businesses. So first, a Section 3 worker. This could be any one of three things. So it doesn't have to be all three, just one of three. First is a very low, a low or very low income individual. We can just use low income. I have a slide coming up that uses our HUD website for the local AMIs, and I've added all of the Hawaii counties to it so we can kind of see what that exact number is. They could be a youth build participant or a similar apprenticeship program. We can talk about that. Or employed by a Section 3 business, which leads into, well, what is a Section 3 business? This would be a business, typically a subcontractor. We rarely see large GCs meet this Section 3 business concern definition. But again, could be one of three things. It is majority owned and controlled by pretty much a Section 3 worker, low or very low income person. 75% or more of the labor hours performed by that business over the prior 3-month period are performed by Section 3 workers, low income individuals, or majority owned and controlled by a Section 8 recipient, housing choice voucher, place-based voucher. In general, for Section 3 businesses, the most common way that we see a business be certified is through the second one here, the middle one. The labor hours performed by that business are mostly done by low or very low income individuals, based again on local HUD AMI. What this does require, however, is that the business is, pretty good at record keeping and being able to show that, here's proof that here's what we pay our individuals annualized out. They make below this amount. Therefore, this percentage of my labor hours of my business over the prior 3-month period have been done by this type of worker. What this does and why it's beneficial and why we really do try and make sure that our contractors and subcontractors are aware of this definition is that if we can get a subcontractor to certify as a Section 3 business under one of these three things, what that means is that for our Section 3 project, if we have a sub on there who is a certified Section 3 business, 100% of those labor hours done by that subcontractor or Section 3 business would be Section 3 worker labor hours. And we'll kind of see why that's important when we get into the reporting aspect, because that's kind of like what we're trying to get. We're just trying to get 25%. But if we have a business who's a Section 3 business, because a Section 3 worker is also someone employed by a Section 3 business, that means 100% of those labor hours would be considered Section 3 worker labor hours. So that's the first one. So we have one more definition to go to. So a Section 3 worker, Section 3 business. Okay, that's kind of like the general low-income individuals. The next one we want to look at, though, is a bit more specific, and that's why we call it a targeted Section 3 worker. So the threshold or the percentage that we require for this type of worker is much lower, mainly because it's just much more specific. So the definition here varies based on the origin of the funding. So we have a public housing definition and a HCD definition. If you want to talk after this, I can kind of explain why I wish this was more of one definition, but just for now, we're going to focus again on the HCD one here at the bottom, because again, we're considering this block grant HCD funding. So the big one here is, again, could be employed by a Section 3 business. So that's a repeat of a Section 3 worker. But the biggest one here is that it's almost like a hyper local individual. So it's a Section 3 worker who also lives within what we call the service area of the neighborhood or project. So this is going to be a 1 square mile radius, basically, or 5 square mile. I'll have to check on that. But we have a tool that allows you to kind of like use census data to see if they are kind of like falling within that category. So public housing is more, a targeted worker is a someone kind of like assisted by that housing authority who has the funding. For a targeted worker for HCD funding, pretty much just someone who kind of like lives within, again, the service area or neighborhood of the project. And then you can see on the left here, it's kind of like a Venn diagram of what each worker is. So we have, our world of workers, and then within that we have Section 3 workers, and then within that we have targeted Section 3 workers. So basically all targeted Section 3 workers are also Section 3 workers, but not all Section 3 workers are also targeted Section 3 workers. I know it's a little confusing. I'm happy to kind of like answer questions to clarify that at the end. And also feel free, if there's like a very short question you have, I do have the chat open. Feel free to put a quick question in there as well. Okay, so back to what is a low-income individual. For Hawaii, we have 5 per our local HUD AMI, and this should actually say FY 2024 up here at the top, not 2023. That's a mistake by me, and I can change that before sending a copy to everyone. This is the Section 3 worker low income AMI. So one thing to note here, that if you go to this website to look at the median family income estimates, it will have a chart that says 1-person household, 2-person household, 3-person household, all the way up to, I think, like 7, maybe. For Section 3 purposes, we're always going to consider this single-person household. So we will not, which is the case for other means-tested programs, so for Housing Choice Voucher or for food stamps or for, whatever other assistance you can get there, they do consider the household. For Section 3 worker status, we do not consider household size, just the income of the single individual worker. So I only had 4 columns, so I just kind of added Maui to the side here, but here is the most up-to-date low-income limits to be considered a Section 3 worker in each county here. Okay, so now that we kind of know who we're trying to prioritize for our Section 3 projects, I'm going to go a little into how we verify these workers, and then how we're going to be submitting reports back to HUD to kind of show whether or not we met those benchmarks for hiring or for, I guess, employing these workers, are some of the better efforts that we did to try to meet those requirements. Okay, so this is kind of a repeat of that. So again, we do have this kind of provision in Section 3. These two kind of mean the same thing. We're making our best efforts and to the greatest extent feasible, basically saying we're trying our best to employ, contract with, and train Section 3 workers and Section 3 businesses. We are aware that depending on, numerous reasons, whether it's prevailing wage rates, whether it's unions, whether it's, these type of things, it's not going to always be possible to meet those benchmarks, to meet the quantitative requirements for Section 3. But kind of what we want to see is that if those aren't met, what have we been doing to still reach out to potential Section 3 workers, to get them hired into better paying jobs, to reach out to apprenticeship programs, to contract with these Section 3 businesses who might meet that qualification, to maybe be able to meet the quantitative benchmarks in the future. So basically this is just kind of saying, were you prioritizing those individuals, those businesses during your kind of bid, while putting out RFPs, while seeking bids for projects, things like that. So again, are we prioritizing Section 3 workers within that neighborhood? Are we reaching out to apprenticeship programs, reaching out to public housing authorities. While I will say that technically, if you do hire a person assisted by public housing, with this funding, they're not considered a targeted Section 3 worker, but it's still a great group to reach out to, and based on the income requirements to gain a voucher, they would therefore be a Section 3 worker as well. So we still really try to encourage reaching out to those groups. Okay, so reporting. Again, the CFR outlines reporting requirements. One thing that's more of a best practice, that's not technically a requirement, is just having kind of a Section 3 plan in place. And who this really, I think, benefits most is, first and foremost, you all as the grantee, but then being able to share that with general contractors, just because I found that a lot of the success in reporting and being compliant in Section 3 almost falls on them, because while they aren't, going to be a Section 3 business, they're going to be subbing out to potential Section 3 businesses, going to be, kind of in charge of submitting those record-keeping requirements to you all to kind of see, okay, did we meet our labor hour requirements for this? So being able to outline those expectations in a Section 3 plan, and to be able to include those in RFPs in contract language is for sure a best practice to kind of use going forward. Okay, so kind of going back into the definitions, when is status determined for this? So depends on business versus worker. So first and foremost, both businesses and workers can self-certify. So I have on a next slide, we do have sample certification forms that are on our HUD Exchange page that we try and share during any trainings we do, any job fairs we do, to have businesses and workers be ready to almost add that as like a point to their resume, being like, I am a self-certified Section 3 worker or Section 3 business, that they can just share, and just so you all know when awarding these bids, when people are applying to jobs, that okay, great, like this can help us be in compliance in the future, and potentially get more contracts going forward. So verification of the business, just because they maybe self-certified back in, we're in November now, let's say they self-certified back in March and had that on there, they'll need to kind of like re-verify that status, right? So let's say they're verifying based on 75% of labor hours done over the prior 3-month period. Like if they had that record keeping back in February, they'll need to kind of like redo that at the time of the contract being awarded. But once that is verified, they maintain that status pretty much as long as they meet the definition, or pretty much the life cycle of the project. For a worker, this is going to be kind of done at one of two times: the date of the initial hire, or the employee certification date, if that's after the initial hire. What's good about this is that while a Section 3 business kind of like has to re-verify with each new contract or project, the worker can maintain that status for 5 years from the date used to establish that status. So even if their income kind of rises, if they at the project time were classified as a Section 3 worker, they can maintain that status, and then we need to reestablish at the end of that 5-year period. Okay, so now what are we looking for, right? So when reporting, we're trying to meet our what's called the safe harbor benchmarks. So this is us tracking the total labor hours done on the project and seeing how many of those labor hours were done by Section 3 workers and targeted Section 3 workers. So the benchmark we're looking for Section 3 workers is going to be 25% of all labor hours. So again, this can be done in a variety of ways. Typically, we find the easiest grants that to be in compliance are ones where someone's already, if it's subject to Davis-Bacon, they're already doing prevailing wages, so they can kind of just like mark within the prevailing wage reporting which of those workers are also Section 3 workers. It's easy math at the end there. But this does require tracking all labor hours done and which of those workers are going to be counted as Section 3 workers. For targeted workers, that number drops to 5%. So we're looking at 25% for Section 3 workers, 5% for targeted workers. And again, going to just stress again the potential benefit of contracting with a Section 3 business, because if we are able to do that, 100% of those labor hours done by that Section 3 business would be done by both targeted and Section 3 workers, because under the definition of those types of workers, it could be someone employed by a Section 3 business. So here again, I'll kind of just like hop out quickly from this and show these forms. I think I have one up. Our HUD Exchange site. Sorry, I'm going to quickly go here. So here on HUD Exchange, let's go back one. And I'll share it in the chat quickly. This by far is the best resource I think we have for Section 3 here at HUD. So it has any of our program notices here on the side, but one of the better pages that we have is if you go to these panels here, about halfway down, under Section 3 Guidebook and Tools, go to View Tools, and this will also answer a question that was just in the chat. Do you have a sample Section 3 plan? We do here. So here we have a Section 3 sample plan. Again, a tool designed to help grantees, their subrecipients, contractors, and subs comply with Section 3. So again, these are not required, not official forms, but they're almost meant to be kind of inspiration for you all to take and use, to put your headers on, to put information that's specific to your grants, to your communities in these plans. So I'll just quickly open up, as you can see here, worker certification forms. So for Section 3 workers, there's two ways a worker can be certified under HCD guidelines. Again, the worker can self-certify, and we'll open up that one now. So here we go. We're going to look at, again, HCD, not public housing, for this grant. I'll bring it open. I probably have a million copies of this on my computer by now, but that's okay. And then here's the form. So pretty basic, kind of gives definitions of what Section 3 is, the purpose of it, and what the worker would do is simply print name, print address, right, which is going to be important for determining the service area to see if they are a targeted Section 3 worker. Here we can enter that income limit. So based on where the project is, what county are we in? So going back to that local AMI slide that we had. And then the worker would just kind of say, I meet at least one requirement in the box above. Why do we not ask which requirement they're meeting? Pretty much because depending on the state you're in, you aren't allowed to really ask what the worker's current income is, because it could then be considered discrimination, hiring discrimination. So it would just be kind of one of these things. And then moving on to targeted worker, do they live within the service area of the project? Again, this requires employer confirmation. And then they sign, basically under penalty of perjury. So first option, worker can self-certify. Second option, which is why it's really important that again, GCs and subs are very aware of this definition and requirements, and potential benefits for future, contracting. If they show and can prove they can like consistently be in compliance with Section 3, the employer can certify on the worker's behalf. So this would be, name of business, address, providing information on who this worker is, and if this worker has been employed by this business for X amount of time, or if they're able to annualize their income over, the 12-month period, they can say that yes, like this worker's income from your employment is below the income-based limit for Honolulu County. Or they could also say, if they are a certified Section 3 business and this worker is employed by them, check Section 3 worker and targeted Section 3 worker. So this way is actually probably, again, if we can just have like good relationships with our GCs, with our subs, the easier way to certify workers. Just getting the employer involved and in the know, and it also then helps with submitting reporting and tracking labor hours and everything like that. Okay, so we'll go back here. Again, highly recommend looking through the HUD Exchange page. We also have, you can go through posted trainings by different HUD staff going over, even more in depth into Section 3, all of those sample forms. There's a sample labor hour tracker through Excel if you are interested in that. It's all a very good resource. And then again, the forms are important because we do, require record keeping. So this is mainly going to be certification forms. Like we kind of need that in there, right? This is typically if there's for whatever reason, a Section 3 complaint or appeal claiming that this business claims to be a Section 3 business, someone says they're not, we need the forms, on our side to say that they are. Okay, so reporting specifically for the NHHBG grant. So this is going to be on Form HUD 590, again on Section 12. As you can see here, what we've pretty much done is just added, and thank you again to Claudine for providing this and also doing a great job explaining it to us yesterday. The top part here about the number of permanent jobs supported is really not in the Section 3 umbrella. We're going to be looking at the bottom part here about, again, total number of labor hours done, total number of labor hours worked by Section 3 workers, and then total number of labor hours worked by targeted Section 3 workers. For this fiscal year, so I know we've been kind of talking about, it's a per project basis. We'll still only be kind of looking at Section 3 applicable projects. But what we want in these boxes is going to be the sum of all active Section 3 projects during your fiscal year, which from my understanding is June 30th to July 1. And I'm sorry if I'm getting that slightly wrong, but it would be based on that. And again, this is not, a breakdown per project. It's we're taking all of our active Section 3 applicable projects that are currently active during that fiscal year and just giving a summary of total labor hours of those Section 3 projects, and then finding out how many of those were done by Section 3 workers, and then how many were done by targeted Section 3 workers. In the box below, it's where we're listing our what we call qualitative efforts. So up here, the number portion where we're going to get a percentage of Section 3 worker and targeted worker is our quantitative section. The qualitative is more, okay, maybe we didn't get 25% and 5%, but what did we do, again, going back to that best efforts, greatest extent feasible, do to try and get to that 25% and 5%. And here's where you can list that. And I'll be kind of passing it over to Ramona shortly to kind of go over very specific examples for your all's community. But here are just kind of like some of the boilerplate ones that we have on our other reporting system. Um, this it's a lot of it is outreach efforts, um, job training, job fairs. Really just kind of like saying we know who in our community could be these Section 3 workers and targeted workers. What are we doing to identify them? So now I will pass it over to Ramona to go over some of those um, specific options in your all's community that she has found. Ramona?
Thanks, Robert. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these qualitative measures. I mean, if you can't satisfy the quantitative, some of the opportunities that Robert just mentioned in regards to how do we build the worker base? How do we also build um, the business base? So the emphasis right now is to give you some ideas and to mobilize some ideas in regards to what's out there. So when you're looking at finding job opportunities and resources for Section 3 workers, some of it is making those connections with workforce, with job fairs, hiring events like Work Hawaii, American Job Center for the city and county of Honolulu on Oahu. I mean, every county has a American Job Center, so they're always having fairs. Or some of the Star Advertiser, or Star Bulletin, Star Advertiser. They do frequent job fairs where they bring a whole bunch of people together, employers, and they have, and there's been a real big push, as you know, for government workers, state, city, county. And so this is one way to do that. Next slide. Another way to take a look at is really on apprenticeships. There's a lot of apprenticeships out there, programs. BIA has a pre-apprenticeship program. How do you build that worker so that you can have them qualify as a Section 3 worker? So part of them is helping to make the connection with apprenticeship programs, pre-apprenticeship programs. Again, you have the American Job Center doing pre-apprenticeship programs. You also have unions doing apprenticeship programs, the BIA, for example. How do you connect them with resources? We do know that one of the major issues that you'll find in regards to hiring a Section 3 worker is childcare. How do you help them file childcare? As you know, Department of Human Services has two subsidy programs, one a general childcare subsidy program, and the other one is the preschool program. And so making those connections and helping them to find that location where they can apply, that can also qualify as qualitative. Next slide. So when we're also looking at assisting workers, maybe they need some financial literacy training and or coaching. So as we know, Aluliki is an excellent resource. They have the Money Smart Financial Literacy Program. Credit unions are out there. Many credit unions offer financial programs. In Peace, of course, has a cultural-based financial literacy program. The state public library system also has financial literacy programs. And as we talk about the state public library system, we can also look at digital literacy. We do know that DHHL just got that $72 million grant to focus on digital literacy, and you folks are looking at creating some digital equity innovation centers. So how do you make those connections to help the workforce to develop the skills? As we know, most jobs, if not all jobs, require some degree of digital literacy skill. So the public library system is an excellent place to also do that. And what's good about that is that they are located in every county. So having these partners, making these partnerships in advance can also help you to address the benchmarks. And the last slide. And finally, I know that on what Claudine has in regards to her NAHASDA, her NHGB benchmarks focuses on jobs, but we can also take a look at building up those small businesses that provide jobs to make sure that they're able to do that, and at some point in time that they would qualify for Section 3 business. So you have your adult schools. This is the McKinley School, but I do know that also in terms of digital literacy, Waipahu Adult School has a digital literacy program. And of course, the partnership with Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement. You know, they have their Trades Academy on Oahu and Maui, and they also have Empowering Uiwi Businesses Kuhana, business accelerator. So some of these, what I'm trying to do is spark some ideas so that you can say that if we can't satisfy totally the benchmarks for producing jobs, we can also talk about how we are qualitatively addressing that by building the capacity and the strength of our workers to be able to qualify. So with that, turn it back to you, Robert.
Great, thank you, Ramona. So yeah, winding down here. So just have one slide coming up on resources. So again, these are just kind of like a lot of the links that I was referring to in the presentation. So again, highlighted the HUD Exchange page here because I just think that is where a lot of the good information is. As you can see here, the HCD Neighborhood Service Area tool on the right-hand side is that source for kind of like finding out whether or not an individual's address is kind of within the service area of the project. Some of these things will not be, you know, like these PAH notices are not relevant to you all, but I just kind of just have a basic list of important ones for trainings. And that is all that I have. So I'm going to take questions now. I do see one in the chat currently that I'll just respond to first. How does this requirement fit with Davis-Bacon required wages? Great question. And I think this can kind of also go into just, you know, not only prevailing wages for Davis-Bacon, but, you know, union wage rates and things like that. First and foremost, Section 3 is not meant to, you know, ignore those requirements. And the goal of Section 3 is to find people higher, better paying jobs, especially of low and very low income status. One thing to note is that while I did say, you know, it could be the case where a business could, you know, annualize the worker's income based on what they're paying him for a certain project, that is possible, but I know not every project that a worker is on is Davis-Bacon wage rate, right? So if we can be as accurate as possible about what that worker is actually earning over an annual year, if they are earning strictly Davis-Bacon wage rates and it's above that limit, you know, that's, in my personal opinion, that's great. And I don't think we're going to be penalizing anyone for having workers, you know, and giving them a livable wage, right? And that's just something that maybe to note in the qualitative reporting is that, you know, we are actually, that's something we're proud of, and we're trying to find individuals in our community to also get into these high paying jobs. Like, does that help you, you know, meet the quote unquote like benchmarks? No, but you're finding individuals in your community to get better paying jobs. And that's really what the end goal of Section 3 is that. So I guess first is, you know, trying to be as accurate as possible about what the actual annual income is of the worker, assuming that not every project they do is prevailing wage. And then two, being proud of paying people prevailing wages, and maybe in the qualitative side, you know, finding individuals in the community who aren't making that and trying to get them into those jobs.
That's kind of a question I had. A lot of our contracted work on larger development projects is going to be, you know, if we do find these Section 3 qualified workers, by the time they become a journeyman or apprentice and are doing whatever that trade is, they're probably going to exceed the income limits that you have specified. But that's what we want. That's kind of what we want to show, right? Is they come in and then so we don't get penalized for that. We just have to quantify what they are before they get the wages in that project. I mean,
exactly.
Exactly. Is that right?
And again, like, yeah, they would be getting those wages at the project, but like, if it's almost like, you know, how much did that employee actually make that fiscal year? Like, and I'm just going to the establishing worker status, right? Like, So first of all, we don't need like this is not these don't have to be new hires for Section 3. That was a part of the old rule was that we were tracking the number of new hires you had on a project, right? But these we can also do a better job, I think, and I've talked to subs and GCs about this, like making sure that our current employees are properly identified, right, in Section 3 status. So first of all, doing that, and then again, this kind of second point here, if you do have someone like, and we're classifying them based on what they have been making, right, which is what we, should be doing. That status sticks with them for 5 years, and then if now you hire them and you're having all of these prevailing wage projects that pushes them above that income limit, that's fine. They don't lose their status because of that, right? So
Okay, that's the story we want to tell with what we do, in a way.
yes,
I mean, yeah.
yes.
Okay.
I think that's exactly, and that's the story that we want to see, right? Like again, the goal is to find people in our communities through HUD funds, like good, high-paying jobs. Like that's really what the goal is. But yeah, again, it's just important to note that in the qualitative reporting section, right? I just for whatever reason, like if they have been making that much under Davis-Bacon for so long that we aren't getting that 25%. I think it would be like a mixed bag of new workers that will eventually make more than that, and they will be Section 3 workers, and old workers who have, because of their classification, have been making more than that. Like, again, still something to be proud of, it, but to make a note of in the qualitative reporting, so that we can know that and also kind of brag about it as well, as you all should.
Thank you.
Yeah,
There's
Cynthia.
a question. Yeah, Cynthia, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to get back to the Davis-Bacon and again, how we go about doing our work. So in utilizing the HASA funds, we're required to contract whoever we contract with has to comply with Davis-Bacon. So I just looked at our charts here and I did a quick calculation, and except for very few categories, most of the prevailing wages in Davis-Bacon requirements would put people above the Section 3 category. So are we saying that as a recipient of NAHASA, we're supposed to make a program to go look for these kinds of people within the community to get them from Section 3 to better wages or what have you? Because that's not what we're doing with our funds. What we're doing with our funds is we're either reconstructing homes or renovating homes for people using contractors with Davis-Bacon wages, or we're building new homes with contractors with Davis-Bacon wages, or I'm renovating a facility, again, with a contractor with Davis-Bacon wages. So I'm having a struggle from my perspective on understanding how Section 3, how we can look at Section 3, because we're already, everything that we do, that we contract out, is with Davis-Bacon labor compliance, which for the most part excludes Section 3 or lower or very low income people. So, because when you look at the wages, it just doesn't, the numbers don't fit. So I guess I'm confused as to why, from an NHHBG standpoint, how we can do anything with Section 3, because everything is going to be zero. We got everybody who's being paid at prevailing in Davis-Bacon.
So I guess kind of go back to what I was saying before. So your all's project under this grant is you're required to pay them prevailing wage rates, right? And I get that. And that would, if that person works on this prevailing wage project for 5 years, like they would not be a Section 3 worker. But there's no guarantee that what they were making before you hired them, right? Like in other projects they're doing, like we're talking about like their annual income. Like is this worker being paid Davis-Bacon, being paid that 40 hours a week, 56 weeks a year? Like, and it's if you look at this slide here, when are we establishing Section 3 worker status? It's at the time of the initial hire or contract. So they were getting paid something before your all's housing rehab or housing construction project, right? Like, kind of what I was saying before. Like, we're not trying to penalize anyone. It's the opposite. We're trying to get individuals in the community into these jobs.
I could give an example that might help
Yeah,
everybody. So like Kuhio Park Terrace, right? KPT. It's a HUD project. It's a little bit different, but in that circumstance, they're going to redevelop it. So what we did is we went and talked story with the labor union. The labor union went out, did one like, hey, we need workers for this project that's coming up. They were able to get people that were, part-time workers or not working at a job like the labor union, bring them onto labor union staff, document them, and then they qualified as Section 3 workers. They got paid Davis-Bacon wages when they are constructing, and that's a worker that come from that local geography, becomes one union Davis-Bacon wage, but for 5 years, we get to count all his hours as Section 3.
exactly.
So that's an example where if you're out doing one project in Molokai, you could do the same thing there where, you got one union, we need workers on Molokai, we're looking for folks, boom. Those hours can be those Section 3 hours. I mean, it's extra work for the GC, extra work for our subcontractors, but that's, I think, how it could work for us.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. As a really great example. Yeah. Again, it's that being able to count that person for 5 years going forward. I mean, I'm sure there are examples of some subs who have like, no turnover and have been paying their workers, a prevailing wage or above for 5 years, and that wouldn't count. And, we're not trying to penalize those contractors either and like say you can't contract with them. But I think there are quite a few examples of unions being able to like recruit, attract based on this, and once that person is hired, their annual income is below the Section 3 status, right? And eventually it will be above it, but not at the time they're being hired for the project. So, and will that method get us to 25%? I don't know. It will get us above 0% though, which is a start, and then you can in the qualitative efforts document what you did, why it worked. I mean, you guys can see, like, this rule is fairly new. 25 and 5% are just nice round numbers. I don't think there was like this algorithm that went into it that like, and it's, this is nationwide, right? Like, we understand that not everyone will make the 25 and 5. Maybe it's too high, maybe it's too low. Like, there's opportunities for us as more reporting comes in on this to change those going forward. But this is what they're at now, and why it's important that we're trying to learn through the qualitative efforts, kind of like what's working and what isn't. But Christian, I really appreciate that example. That's kind of exactly what we're looking for. And then Cynthia, does that make sense, or do you still have kind of questions on that?
It does, but it begs the question of, this is a database management issue. So you go out, you get all the information first time through, and then you keep the information in a massive database for whoever that individual is. And as you get new jobs that you contracted, you got to ask, is this person on your crew, so I can continue to count them or not? So it sounds like it's a massive database structure that we're gonna have to put together and keep track of for however long. So
Yeah, I mean,
I'm having, I mean, this is just me. I'm just having difficulty with the, I'm gonna use a term and it's gonna sound nasty, busy work
mhm,
for keeping all of this data around to be able to get 3 numbers a year. You know, but
mhm,
in the meantime, the people who are trying to get the contracts out and oversee the contracts are staff, potentially. Now we're asking them, oh, by the way, keep track of this database for the next gazillion years to see if that individual is working on the project that's going on in year 3 or year 4 or year 5. And are they still making below the wages for the that you showed?
mhm.
It to me, it's just a
Yeah.
large
So, again, you
busy
don't
work
need to.
thing.
Yeah. So again, for workers, right? You don't need to kind of. It's, and I do understand. Like there is there's definitely a burden in the record keeping requirements for sure. And we do hope that as it becomes more common and with Section 3 plans and with sharing the certification forms, right? Like those forms are dated. So we would have kind of this, like each worker would have their certification date. So let's say their certification date is November 15th, 2024. And if we can just like have that number here, we don't need to recertify that worker until November 15th, 2029, right? They maintain that status for 5 years. It's not like after 2 years and they're checking again like whether or not they're still making under that. We hope they're not, right? Like we hope by year 2, year 3, like they've passed that annual Section 3 worker income, right? And then after 5 years, they will no longer be one, but hopefully they're on to bigger and better things. But yeah, to
So
totally get the
so
record
this is
keeping burden, but
so this is once you verify that they're a Section 3 worker, you don't recertify them for Section 3 worker for 5 years. So you just put them on the books and say, okay, they're a Section 3 worker. And for 5 years, you count them in the numbers that you're reporting.
exactly. Yep. So yeah, this portion on the slide here, established Section 3 workers or targeted Section 3 workers may count their labor hours for 5 years from the date used to establish their status. So that's again like for the record keeping, like having those forms that we talked about, having those forms dated. Again, totally get it. Like almost adding like a worker database is a burden. It for sure is busy work. But if we can kind of just like do it on the front end, just have, worker X, certification date, November 15th, 2024. Just like finding that worker again, be like, okay, great. Like we're still within that 5-year period. Section 3 worker. Even
Okay.
better if they're a targeted worker.
So I want to know if HUD is going to have a database so that I don't have to go as we get new contracts on board, and it may be somebody new to me, but as a certified worker from 4 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
having to go back and figure out how he was verified as a certified worker by another company.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, at this time, HUD will not have a
Okay.
database. Yeah, hopefully, I think that would be a good best practice if we're like talking to workers to kind of like keep their certification form again, almost as like an item to put on their resume, right? To kind of like have that. Hopefully, as a grantee, you are working in the same area. Yeah, again, I wish I could say we could have like an amazing database of all Section 3 businesses and Section 3 workers and could automatically like do that, but unfortunately at this time we just don't have that.
So if we can, Jane has her hand up from Hawaii Island Habitat. If we can have her ask her question.
Hi. So I have a specific question, and I don't know how this affects Habitat for Humanity. So, we build through DHHL. DHHL receives the NAHASDA funding, which funds our bills.
Yep.
So, is DHHL contracting with us as a GC? And so, as the GC, do we need to be a Section 3 business?
So first part of your question, yes, right? DHHL is, you are kind of like the GC. You do not need to be a Section 3 business. There's no, again, we aren't really, being a Section 3 business is very beneficial in meeting the benchmarks, because if you were a Section 3 business, which I don't think Habitat for Humanity is.
Well, our very small affiliate might very well be a Section 3
Yeah.
business. So
Yeah. So again, like the benefit of that is going back to this slide here. Every single labor hour done by a Section 3 business would be both a targeted Section 3 worker labor hour and a Section 3 worker labor hour. So if you, as Habitat, like let's say you have a sub actually doing the work, right? And they're the ones doing all of the labor hours. If they were a certified Section 3 business, if they kind of met that 75% or more labor hours done over a prior 3-month period were done by Section 3 workers, right? And that's certified at the time of the contract being awarded. Like we're pretty much set for that entire project, because it would be 100%.
okay, and so for our employees, say we are Section 3 business, our Habitat. So is it just our construction employees that are physically at the build site that are
Yes.
going to be counted, or would be admin that's also counted?
Just the
construction.
work site, yeah.
Okay.
Technically the admin would be under like what we call like professional service hours, which can be considered like extra credit. Like if you happen to have admin staff who are also Section 3 workers, you would pretty much just put, which it's so rare that this happens. I typically just don't even put it in the trainings. Let's say, for example, you did have an admin staff that was a Section 3 worker, right, and certified. You could pretty much not put their labor hours in the denominator and just in the numerator. So it would just kind of be like, again, like bonus points for the percentages.
I will reach out specifically. And then my other question for the construction staff that's actually on site that are Habitat employees, they must all be paid Davis-Bacon wages.
Okay.
Is that correct?
So I am not in the office of Davis-Bacon. That should be noted in the contract. So Davis-Bacon is pretty much just like,
we will have
Yeah,
the
go-
next training. Yeah, the next training we
Right.
have will be on Davis-Bacon, but it is, Claudine's on, it is in the NAHASDA statute that any use of NAHASDA funds requires compliance with Davis-Bacon requirements. Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry, I have one more question.
yeah, sure, no, please go ahead.
So we have, in order for us to get almost any work done on a lot of the houses, we have single person businesses that, like our plumber, he has no staff, so he has no Davis-Bacon wages. However, he probably will not meet the benchmark of $62,000 a year because he is a single plumber, so he will not be a Section 3 business. Can we still use him?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. There's no, again, it's a hiring preference. So
Okay.
like it's just because, I mean, you don't have to not use someone because they're on a Section 3 business, right? Like if they are the most qualified and to do the work, like that's who you hire. And you would then just you would therefore likely not meet the benchmarks of 25% and 5%. But you could maybe then talk about, did you, and that's only, like one portion of the total labor hours on the project, right?
Right.
Like the plumbing portion is just X percentage of total labor hours. So that one there,
Okay.
but I don't know. So, but
Well,
there is like,
yeah, that's okay. If Habitat if our affiliate is a Section 3 business, then we kind of cover a lot of it anyway. So
you would, yeah, that would be again, it's almost like a, if you can
okay.
do that, it's like a cheat code because we are generous with that definition of if you're employed by a Section 3 business, then you're both a targeted and Section 3 worker. So the labor
Okay.
hours, yeah, it becomes a lot better if you can kind of, certify that business and then go from there.
Okay, we'll figure it out. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
I just wanted to thank everyone for their time. I know we went a little over. Before we wrap up again, just last call. Is there any other questions or anything else before we end the training for today?
I just wanted to say, Nicole, that I put my email in the chat. Feel free anytime if you have any kind of like hyper specific project questions, which I know in Section 3 come up quite often, and they're typically better to just like have a one-on-one email or call with than to kind of do it over a group training like this. So my email's in the chat. Feel free to just shoot me an email anytime saying, hey, Robert, can we hop on a call? I have this question. I'm always happy to help.
Thank you so much for that, Robert. I saw Claudine came off of camera. So if you want to say anything to Claudine, just want to thank both of you for your time and providing this training.
Thank you. I wanted to extend my appreciation as well to Robert and Ramona. Thank you so much for providing this presentation on this very informative topic. So again, mahalo.
Aloha, everyone.
Aloha.